Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about our annual discussion of what directors think, and we're going to be looking at the 2021 highlights. And joining me to discuss these are Melanie Nolen, who's the research editor for Corporate Board Member and Chief Executive Magazines. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you, TK. I'm happy to be here.
And also joining us, Dottie Schindlinger, who's the Executive Director of the Diligent Institute. Welcome back, Dottie.
Thanks, TK. It's great to be with you again and with Melanie.
Yep. You were just talking about the climate and the ESG certificate, and it's nice to have you back. I hope that program has started off well.
It's going great.
Melanie, I think it's only appropriate, even though this is an annual discussion, for you to take a second and just sort of describe the What Directors Think survey. I know it has been in existence for an amazing 19 years. So just give our audience that recap about how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, it is an annual survey. It's our largest survey by far. Corporate Board Member does several surveys during the year where we ask board members to weigh in on certain issues that are top of mind. But What Directors Think is the largest survey because it covers everything in their purview. So every aspect of governance is covered in the survey, and it is intended to be sort of a benchmarking exercise for boards, lending an ear to what's happening in other boardrooms, how other directors are tackling certain issues, and so on and so forth. So, as you mentioned, 19 years in existence, and there's still tremendous participation in the survey. 400 directors this year took the time to respond to our questions. So we're really appreciative of that, and the insights gleaned from that are just fantastic.
Well, I am proud to say that I have been part of it since year one. So it's been fun to watch the change in attitudes over those 19 years. So let's take a look at what's happening with the 2021 results. I always enjoy covering the highlights of the show where we look into this. And let's start with one of my favorite questions, and that is which of the following issues do you believe will bear the greatest influence on the success of your company strategy in 2022? And Melanie, I'll sort of start with you to give a recap.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's always what's going to be top of mind for you this year. What do you expect that you will be, one of the main focus of discussion in the boardroom? I don't think it's any surprise to anybody this year that the top issue is the economy. 50% of directors listed it as one of the strategy influencers for the year. I don't think that there's any need to explain why. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. What's really interesting in this question, though, is that 42%, so in close second, is talent. And talent has rarely made the top list of issues for boards. It's always been one of those relegated more to management, covered, in passing through briefings and making sure that the strategy is adequate, but never to that extent. This year, though, it's made its way to the second spot on the list of strategy influencers. And I think it's really telling about the challenges that companies are facing right now with the shortage of talent, the shifting workplace dynamics, everything that's surrounding the idea of how do we deliver on growth when we're faced with this talent market, this labor market right now. So I think that's really what stood out this year to me in that question.
So Dottie, not a lot of surprises this year. Sometimes there are, but those are pretty predictable.
Yeah, not a huge surprise. I think, to Melanie's point, the economy probably doesn't need much of an explanation. I think everybody's watching very carefully what's happening with the Fed and what's happening on inflation. But as she mentioned, the talent item coming up high on board agendas, maybe not surprising, but it is unprecedented in many ways. And when we asked some questions about, what do directors find most challenging to oversee, we saw that same answer come up. So clearly talent is something that is top of mind for directors.
So let's take another look. Another question that I remember, Melanie, was what issues do directors find most challenging? And what did the results show for that question?
Well, this year, 41% of them listed cybersecurity and data privacy as the top challenge to oversee. Again, that's not a huge surprise. However, we've looked back at prior years and where cyber fit in all of this. And cyber, just 10 years ago, cyber was not even a high concern for most boards. For something like 80% of directors, they just didn't report cyber as being an issue that they needed to cover. 5 years later, we see the increase. All of a sudden, they were having regular discussions with their CIO or CISOs and bringing in outside consultants to guide them on the issue. And now this year, it's just made it to the top of the list. And I think it's this ever evolving issue that's really difficult to wrap your head around. How do you stay one step ahead of the curve? And then what questions should directors ask of management to make sure they're really thoroughly overseeing that side of the business? So I think that it's extremely complex, and it's no surprise to me that it's made the top of the list this year.
So Dottie, what was surprising the other years was that it was pushed down. And I think we saw this even in the boardroom. There was so much going on that this issue of cyber got actually pushed down in what people were worrying about. But it doesn't take many breaches or incidences to have that sort of vault to the top again.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think we've been seeing trends like this throughout the pandemic, right? You have a lot more of a distributed workforce that brings with it some additional inherent cybersecurity concerns when people are using home networks as opposed to, inside the company's firewall. I think basically over the last couple of years, companies have gotten a lot better at managing those kinds of remote workforce issues. But we also have just seen an explosion of cybercrime. It's increased more than fourfold throughout the pandemic. Ransomware has become a huge source of enterprise risk for a lot of organizations, and not just companies, but municipalities, school districts. I mean, everyone's feeling the burn of these ransomware attacks. And so I think cyber quite rightly tops the list of concerns. I think maybe what is a little bit more interesting in the issues that directors find most challenging to see is that if I just cast them kind of broadly, the next 5 categories below cyber risk are all ESG categories, starting with talent and workforce, followed by culture, followed by leadership succession and transition, followed by social issues, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, followed by climate and environmental risk. So I think that is incredibly telling that these are the areas that directors are feeling more pressure to have good answers on. They see the talent crunch as a huge source of risk for growth in their companies. And I think that's quite right. I think leadership and succession issues are being exacerbated by the Great Resignation. There was a great article I was reading this morning about the fact that middle managers in particular are leaving in droves. And that's leaving a lot of C-suite professionals without kind of a next in line. And it's a huge concern. So I think boards are right to spend time thinking about these issues. I think a little concerning is that they don't feel like maybe they're in the best position to oversee these issues. They're finding them very challenging.
So, ladies, there was a question that I don't remember previously on culture, and that was, how confident are you in your board's culture tools and resources? And Dottie, I'm sure, like me, you're pleased that at least culture is in the discussion. But what did the results show with respect to that question?
Yeah, I mean, the results are a little bit of a mixed picture. I mean, on the one hand, you've got only 12% of the respondents saying that they are absolutely confident that they have a good understanding of the culture of their companies and feel confident in overseeing culture. But you do have another 49% that feel significantly confident. So, it seems like there's a bit of bullishness on the part of directors that they feel like they've got a good handle on culture. I think what's interesting is then to weigh that against the question we asked as a follow-up, which is, what are the methods you're using to oversee culture? And in that, we saw really the primary way that they're overseeing culture is just employee surveys. Only 9% are doing any kind of one-on-ones. 7% are doing site visits. Now, of course, site visits is a little bit of a loaded question during this pandemic. It may not be practical or feasible, but I think you get a completely different picture when you have some opportunity to interact one-on-one with people as opposed to just reading survey data. You see things all anonymized and already summarized in a survey response. you get a very different picture if you have a chance to speak one-on-one. And I would say, especially because we're seeing such a huge exodus of middle managers, division heads, middle managers, might be good to do some spot checks with these folks. And so I wonder if boards really have the clear picture of culture that they think they do.
So Melanie, I know that you, in addition to doing the survey, talk to directors that have submitted responses. So on this particular question, what are you hearing back? Because it would be interesting, and I think it's sort of a bullish response here that seems to be sort of over and above what I would have expected.
Yeah, I mean, the question doesn't really tell the whole story, and that's what I'm finding out whenever I'm talking to directors, because it's one thing to ask their level of confidence with the tools and methods they use, but it's another to ask their confidence in their management team. And that's really the answer that I'm getting from most directors when we're doing the one-on-ones as a follow-up to the survey. It's, look, you got to trust your management team that they're doing the right thing and that they're trickling the right tone down all the way across the organization. And I think that that's where boards are coming off here, maybe overly confident, but that may actually be a great sign that they trust their management team. Now, whether that's the right thing to do and not, go as Dottie mentioned and organize site visits or one-on-ones, that's a different topic to be had. But I think when we're speaking of the level of confidence, I think it stems from the fact that they do trust their management teams to do the right thing in that regard.
Yeah, I'm going to walk that middle road, Graham, because I think that while trust is great and ultimately you have to have a great rapport and what there for oversight and checks and balances. And I think to blindly, and again, that's assuming that they're blindly trusting, management. I think it's always good to have a check and balance when you're got oversight responsibility. So, well, we just have little time left, but I wanted to make sure that we did discuss sort of an ESG question. And I know the one that was asked was related to ESG and executive comp. And the question was, is your company considering tying environmental or social metrics to executive compensation? So Melanie, what did the director say? Because I don't hear a lot of companies that have made that step yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's the second year we asked this question. The first year as part of what directors think. And I think that it just, both, by the way, social and environmental are pretty much yielding the same results. And most of them are just not doing it. And there's reasons for that. Whenever we speak with directors afterwards, they tell us, well, there's no guidelines on this. There's no standards. And that's the reasoning we've been hearing for several years now. There's really no best route to go about it without risking a change several years from now. So some of them are telling us, how do you implement a framework that is very likely going to change just in a couple of years? So that's reason one. And then what I'm also hearing is directors saying, look, it's not because we're not really putting in hard metrics into our formula that we're not considering it when we're reviewing the data. So I think that it's definitely part of the conversation for comp committees particularly, but very few right now have actually put in some hard metrics into the compensation formula.
It seems that diversity would be a pretty easy one to work in there. At the same time, you don't want to get to a point where you're assigning minimal levels, like 5% of your pay is this, and 10% is this. You want to not get down to that minutia, when you're creating an executive comp plan. But I'm sure it's being discussed in some fashion. So what's your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Melanie is completely right. The majority of companies are not doing this, but I think it's worth pointing out that it is a pretty sizable minority of companies that are either already doing this or are considering doing so. When we ask that question about social metrics, really it's about 40% that either are already doing this or are thinking about doing it. And when we asked about environmental metrics, it was 39%. So I think, it's a sizable minority. Look, there's lots of inherent issues, right? I mean, on the one hand, if you think about something like increasing diversity across the leadership of a company or reducing carbon emissions, these are not problems that you solve in a night or maybe even in a year. And so tying them to an annual compensation structure, it's complicated, right? Because you may be making progress, but you may set some really ambitious targets and for lots of reasons may not be able to hit those targets. I think, for example, in the diversity question, one of the challenges I've been hearing from a lot of boards and company leaders is that they maybe did an exceptional job at recruiting and hiring for diverse talent, but they're having a lot of problems right now with talent retention, just like every company in the country. So it could be something that they're doing their best to try to keep that pressure going and just still not hitting their targets. And sometimes when you incentivize things in that way, it can be a little bit difficult to figure out, well, did we meet it or didn't we? It depends on what month you look at the data. So I would say those are some complexities that companies are working through, but I don't know that this is an idea that's going to go away, right? When you think of it from the board perspective, these are areas they care deeply about. They want to be responsive to institutional investors and to shareholders. So they know they've got to do something. And executive compensation is one of the things they have some control over. So I'd expect us to see those metrics begin to go up a little bit year over year.
Only 5% on social and 4% on environmental matters. Only 5% and 4% of boards have actually discussed it and opted against it. The majority that's not doing it are just saying we haven't discussed it yet. So that's an important point to make.
Yeah. So Dottie, I know that Diligent and corporate board member having been great partners in this, survey, and you guys have spent time, again, as a team, putting together a white paper with survey results and sort of discussing all this. Where can people get a copy of the white paper?
Yeah, we're so excited about this year's report. I mean, Melanie and I had lots of conversations about the fact that we sort of feel like this might be the best one ever because it was really comprehensive and had such fascinating results. So you can get that white paper at diligentinstitute.com. You can also get that on the corporate board member site at boardmember.com. So either website, you'll be able to find the white paper. We hope you'll visit both. So maybe go ahead and do that, but you'll be able to find the white paper. It's available for free download, and we hope that you'll share those results as broadly as possible.
Well, ladies, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And again, I always look forward to our annual results on something that we've had the opportunity to look at for 19 years. So thanks to you both for taking the time and joining us today.
Thanks so much, TK.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And that will conclude this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.